Okay, let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for an opportunity once again to study together. We invite your Spirit's presence into our hearts. We ask for forgiveness for our sins, for our hard-heartedness. And we ask, Lord, that you can guide and direct in this study. We pray for this movement, that you can lead it, and that we can follow. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Good morning, everyone. And I'm not sure exactly where we're going to go today in this study, but I thought we should at least look again at this statement from page 97 of Notebook 3, where Jeff goes through this study. And because we're trying to close up this study here on Revelation chapter 9. And when Jeff makes this statement, so this is about the Sunday law in the United States. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. So Jeff, in the year 2000, understands that this is the Sunday law, and that's the event that he's looking for, as we know. Now, he introduces Islam. Well, this is a study on Islam, but he introduces Islam in connection with the Sunday law. Now, is this something that Jeff has always done? Has he continued to do this? Or is this something that was unique to what he was doing in the year 2000? Because I know prior to that, I don't see him doing this. And I really can't. I mean, the only thing that he has said about the Sunday law is that Islam is protecting God's people from the Sunday law. But here, remember, he's saying that this is going to create the circumstances where radical Islam will provide the environment politically, economically, socially, and religiously to pass a Sunday law in the United States, which seems to be contrary to what he has said at other times, after 9/11. At which we're going to look at his other the article from September of 2016, which I didn't have time to get together. So any thoughts on this? September.
It would almost seem as if this is something that Jeff came to after continual study.
Okay, so he came to this after continual study, and he presents this in this paper. So here I'm going to bring up, this is the Future News. I think this is the one. Let me see. I'm going to have to search it. I probably should have just. I know, looking at searching for September in an issue in September 13. So yeah, this is okay. So Jeff is going to address here in this one, and I don't know if this is interesting here. So let's zoom in a bit. Okay, the date of September of 9/11 is 9 + 1 + 1, which equals 11. So one of the things you can see here in connection with 9/11 is that Jeff analyzes the date 9/11. Now, he also says it's the 254th day of the year. And he goes 2 + 5 + 4 = 11. And after September 11, there are 111 days left to the end of the year. So what would be the significance of this? That we see this here in September of 2001, that we have this analysis of the date of September 11th in this way? Is this something new to the movement? Have we seen this type of thing prior to, the July 18th or November 9th? Because we've done this type of analysis since then. But do people remember these types of things from the past? What's the significance of 111? Anyone?
We had connected it to the 11th day of the first month.
Okay, the 11th day of the first month. And what's that?
Well, that was when Jeff had, he said he understood Daniel 11.
Okay,
This
right.
was back in 2019.
Okay, so back in, it would be back in 2020.
Yeah, sorry, thank you,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so January 11th, 2020, Jeff finds significance in this number, 111. And yet, I don't think we connected it to September 11th in the way that we just saw in these notes here, in this newsletter. Correct?
No, we didn't.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of interesting. And that September 11th it's 111 days to the end of the year because it's the 254th day of the year. So that's just 365 minus one for each of those digits. So that's an interesting insight that I've never noticed before. But he's doing things that we have been doing. And that means there has been a precedent in this movement for doing this. Now, this is, again, from the same issue. And he says, I invite you to consider some of the points of prophecy that Future for America has regularly presented over the last 7 years and determine if the focus qualifies as present truth and connects with the history of the last few days. We have consistently taught and discussed that the final events will come suddenly and unexpectedly. Who expected last Tuesday's attack? So what is the significance of this statement here? Because I went through and surveyed and searched Islam all through the papers up to this point of his Future News newsletter. And I don't find very many references to Islam, and actually not a great deal of references to suddenly and unexpectedly. I find a few. But what is Jeff doing here when he connects this suddenly and unexpectedly to the September 11th attack? And so this is shortly after September 11th, last Tuesday's attack. So he's writing this obviously after and not long after. I would think last Tuesday could mean it could be Sunday or Monday or Saturday or Friday or something. I don't know exactly what date. But what is Jeff doing? What is it that he's seeing? He doesn't fully see it yet. But remember, he talks about suddenly and unexpectedly in Notebook 3. Does he not?
He did.
Yeah. So yet when this happens, and he talks about, we have consistently taught and discussed that the final events will come suddenly and unexpectedly. Who expected last Tuesday's attack? He's not thinking back to his study regarding the trumpets. Though that is really the place where he talks about suddenly and unexpectedly. So what does this mean when Jeff recognizes this but doesn't recognize its complete significance? While we're thinking about that, we'll look more at this number 11. So 11.9 is the area code to Iraq and Iran. Now, I haven't confirmed all these. 1 + 1 + 9 = 11, obviously, just like 9 + 1 + 1 = 11. One thing that we have noticed is the twin towers standing side by side looks like the number 11. The first jet to hit the towers was Flight 11. The state of New York is the 11th state of the Union. New York City has 11 letters. Afghanistan, 11. The Pentagon, 11. Ramzi Yousef, 11 letters, convicted of orchestrating the attack on the World Trade Center. I'm not even sure who that is. But that must be the attack talked about in 1993 because he was convicted. So I assume that was the person. Flight 11, there was 92 on board. 9 + 2 is 11. And Flight 77, there's 65 on board. 6 + 5 is 11. And of course, 77 is 7 times 11. So what is it that we're noticing about the number 11? What is the significance of this number? Because we looked at the number 13 and we looked at the number 12. And we just recently started to look at the number 11. Again, obviously, this movement looked at this number 11 in the past. What could the number 11 mean?
We can maybe connect it to like the 11th hour.
Okay, the 11th hour. Okay, can you explain that a bit more?
If the 12th hour is when no man can work.
Okay.
So that's the end of the day, the dark, And then, so that's like the close of probation. So the 11th hour would be coming up with the time period just before the end.
Okay.
The close of probation. The 11th hour was the 11th month was when Moses gave his last sermon before he died, and then they went into the promised land.
Okay.
So, and that was just after the 12th month. Maybe you could not make that application, but I just thought I would mention it.
Okay, so now we know also there was 12 disciples and Judas betrayed Christ. So that left 11 disciples. Is there any significance in that symbol that we can see? Okay, there's the first 11 chapters of Daniel, then the close of probation is chapter 12. So, and that kind of relates to the idea of the disciples, because 11 is one short of 12, right? Anything else regarding 11? So those are good points.
Yeah, when Christ breathed on his disciples, I suppose that Thomas wasn't there, so I was going to think there was 11, but then he wasn't there until about a week or so afterwards. So normally we talk about that, the few drops, the sprinkling, being connected to 9/11.
Okay. Yeah. Now, one thing you see here on this that Jeff does note in September is this reference to Testimonies Volume 9, where he talks about the buildings in New York. It doesn't seem, though, that initially he understands that this section starts in Volume 9, page 11, right? He's just going to this statement. And he's definitely not at this point lining up 9/11 with August 11th, 1840. Because he's not seeing this as the third woe. He's not making that connection to the event that he was talking about in Notebook 3. Now, I'm gonna go here. Well, this may seem somewhat unrelated, but this is just something that I was looking at and thinking about again. So this is our structure of 777 days. Now we can see that the 777 structure is 111 times 7, which would be significant. It's something that we've understood. That is, it's 111 weeks, right, from November 9th to December 25th, 2021. Now, I was in the paper that I recently wrote, I referenced this near the end of the paper because I wanted to go through the structure of the pandemic, though I don't know if I did a good job. I probably have to rewrite the end of the paper and try to add some more material because I did it this morning. But anyway, we see here there's the 100 days of prayer is 144,000 minutes. And the 10 days of prayer would be how many minutes if you just count 10 cardinal days? One-tenth of that, right? So 14,400 minutes. Now, we also have the significance of these days being 13 days, whether you're counting an ordinal number of 13 days like July 4th to July 18th, or a cardinal number of days from December 25th to January 6th, you get this symbol of 18720, which is simply the number of minutes in a day, 1,440 minutes in a day, and you multiply that by 13. Now, I sent this to Stephen and maybe Aran as well. I was looking at this period of 11 days. Now, when we look at this chart, the 100 days of prayer include March 27th from the beginning of it to the end of July 4th, because it's actually 99 cardinal days. And then we're counting those 13 days to July 18th as ending July 4th and beginning July 18th. Now, the 10 days of prayer from January 16th to January 6th to January 16th, how many days would that be? I know it's kind of crazy to ask somebody how many days 10 days are, but how many days would it be?
Well, implicitly, you could say there's 11.
Yeah, so if you're including January 6th, which they would have been in the 10 days of prayer, which is not what they did in the 100 days of prayer. I mean, they could have called it 99 days of prayer if they had followed the same counting procedure. But of course, the 100 days of prayer just sounds better. 99 days of prayer sounds odd. But the 10 days of prayer, people aren't going to call it 11 days of prayer, but it's going to include January 6th and January 16th. It's not going to, start at the end of January 6th and begin at and end at the end of January 16th, or start at the beginning of January 6th and end at the beginning of January 16th. It's going to include both of those days, just as the 100 days of prayer did. Now, if we look at 111 days, how many minutes is that? So I'm going to bring up the calculator. So I'm gonna do this again. So I'll just go through some of these calculations that we've done in the past. So if I do, for instance, 12 days times 1440 minutes, I would get this number 17280, which has all of the digits of July 1820, but just in a different order. So if I add that, I do get the July 1820 in the proper order, the 18th day of the 7th month of the 20th year, right? So we have that symbol. Now, if I take this number of minutes and multiply it by 11, I get this number. Now, this number in and of itself, I couldn't really find any significance with this number. But one of the things I do when I have 5-digit numbers like this, and I'm looking at them in relation to time, I know that the Jewish day is divided into 25,920 parts called chelik. And so it's 25,920 chelikim. And so what I do is I just divide this. If I took this as, instead of minutes, I took it as chelikim, and I divided it by 25,920. I would get how a decimal that represents the part of a day. Now, in order to turn this into hours, I would just multiply it by 24, and I would say that it's 14 hours. That is, it's obviously more than half of the day. So it's 14 hours. And then I subtract this 14 hours. And I multiply this next part by 60 to find the number of minutes. And this works out to, well, I did something wrong here. I did that wrong. I got to go back. I didn't subtract it. I didn't finish the calculation. So then what I have to do is I have to multiply this by 60. And what I get is 40 minutes. So if I take this symbol, 11 days represents, in a symbolic way, 14 hours and 40 minutes. And what is 14 hours and 40 minutes a symbol of? Is it just not a symbol of what we started with, the number of minutes in a day? Even though it's not minutes. And there's no reason that this number should do this that I could figure out. That is, it wouldn't happen with any other kind of number. So it's 1440, 14 hours and 40 minutes, which is the number of minutes in the day, which is 1/100th of the number of minutes in 100 days. So pretty interesting, at least to me. So what does this tell us about the number 11? What is it that we're supposed to see about the number 11 in our lines? I know it's kind of a very broad question. You know, one of the things about the 11th day of the first month, so that was the date. I'm going to bring it up here. I think it go like this, but no, I've got to see if I can find them. Well, so one of the things in the week of Christ, it's 2020. That is, in the week of Christ symbol, the 11th day of the first month represents the year 2020 in this week of Christ structure. It also is the day in which they had that in the Civil War, that fast that Ellen White said that the Adventists could participate in because of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, where she said that we couldn't participate in the fasts prior to that because of the hypocrisy of the North. So that call to fast was insincere, where this call to fast was. And it happens to be the 11th day of the first month. So it shows up here again and again. So I probably have it here in, so I think the way that Jeff would have represented it here would have been like this. And here it is. So if you look at this chart, this is the one that we're talking about, the 11th day of the first month. Now, this was part of this structure of September 7th. Oops. Sorry about that. So, go back here. Okay, let's just look at it on this one. I ended up hitting the wrong button. So if we look here, we have September 7th, November 9th, and January 11th. And if we add those together, that is 97 plus 119 plus 111, we get this number of 327, or March 27th. And that is the number of days from where to where. Anybody remember? What did this 327 represent? Oh, it's not the number of days, because it's 63 weeks, which is 441 days. Okay, so you're going to correct me on that, right? Iran?
Oh, I was going to say, 200, was it 273 days from March 27 to December 25?
Yeah, so there's going to be 273 days from March 27, 2021, but also 327 is a symbol of March 27, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then we have these two periods of 63 days. For some reason, the one period is missing here. I'll just put it over here. These two periods of 63 days, and here we have a period of 63 weeks, and that's 441 days. From January 11th to March 27th is 441 days, and we can see that's an inversion of 144, which is 1,000th of 144,000. And then also we could take these same dates as 79 plus 911 plus 111. And if we add them together, we get 1101, which can be represented as the 11th day of the first month. So Jeff found this very significant, that we could do this, that we could take this structure. Now, this was part of a larger structure, which he called, I believe he called it the midnight chiasm, if I remember correctly, or I don't know if this was or this might have been the Levitical chiasm. I can't remember what he called this one. I think it was the midnight chiasm.
I thought it was Levitical.
Maybe it's the Levitical. Okay. And you can see that there was this other period of 126 days. So these are both periods of 126 days. Right. So just put this over here. And this was from the 9/11 prayer in 2018, which is on June 9th, so 9/11 p.m. at sunset, around sunset, that Jeff gave this prayer. And it marks a period of 126 days, which also marks the period of Samuel Snow's letters, which has April 19th in the center, but this one has August 11th in the center. There's a lot more to this. And then it connects to this from October 13th to September 7th is this period of time from where we had marked the 391 and a half days to November 9th. And we can see that the center of this is March 27th, and it says 2020, but it's 2019. This might have been a working copy that I never ended up using. So March 27th, 2019, the center of that is March 27th, 2020, right? So that other chart that I showed you, which with the March 27th, beginning the 100 days of prayer, that's going to start right in between these two dates, March 19th and March 27th. Or March 19th, March 27th, 2019, and March 27th, 2021. So we're going to have a March 27th in the center of that. And that March 27th becomes extremely significant in connection with the pandemic, and also with the structure related to July 18th and to January 6th. So let me see. I'm just going to see if I have some other ones here. Probably not. So these numbers show up together quite a bit just because. So that's going to be it. So there's just this shorter one here, 63 weeks. I could have put 441 days there. So I'll go back to the 100 days of prayer one. So when we had looked at this, one of the things that we had done, initially Stephen had done, is he had divided this 777 days into 252 and 525 days. But we could also see that there was 252 days from July 18th to March 21st, which Iran mentioned. And this division is what I call a natural division. It just gives a different iteration of the same number. So you have three different ways you could do that. You could have 434 plus 343 and 616 plus 161, or 252 plus 525. And here we have two of these represented on this chart. Now, January 16th marks one of those natural divisions, and that marks the end of these 10 days of prayer. And between the 10 days of prayer and the 100 days of prayer, I put there 187 days, but that's an inclusive count that includes July 4th and January 6th. Now, July 4th represents the first day of the first month for the United States. That's where they mark Independence Day, right? So that kind of is a symbol of the first day of the first month. And we noted this before, that January 6th is the 22nd day of the 10th month on the biblical calendar, which is a symbol of the Day of Atonement. And the number of days from the first day of the first month to the Day of Atonement is 187 inclusive days. And this is the same span of time. So that means we can look at the biblical calendar as representing, in a symbol, the Day of Atonement. Now, we have marked this day, January 6th, in sort of a preliminary way. It's sort of maybe a tentative way. As what event? What could it possibly be?
Well, it's been suggested that it was Raffia.
Okay, so why would we say it's raffia? I mean, it's obvious. I mean, which raffia even is this that we're suggesting? Because we looked at November 9th as raffia. And raffia is midnight. And we looked at November 9th as midnight. And we made a suggestion yesterday, at least I made the suggestion, that, possibly when we look at our line, that our movement is like a zoom in to the midnight symbol on the line of the Levites. So how could we make January 6th be raffia? What would be our reasoning for that? I mean, I'm not saying I have the answers. I really am asking these questions because it's something we need to explore. So what would be some reasons we would say that it's raffia, or reasons that we would try to argue against it being raffia? So what would be the main reasons we see it as raffia first?
In a sense, America becomes more with the election victory, first of all, but then that was contested for some months. It still wasn't really sure whether it was going to happen or not.
Right.
But that there sort of really event, January 6th, kind of weighs things more, that Biden is going to be inaugurated, and there's not going to be any sort of contest after that.
Right, because Trump basically, he had no support. after January 6th.
Well, it's kind of diminished.
Oh, yeah, hugely. I mean, obviously, a lot of people might have supported him, but as far as within the government, his own government, he had no support. We would agree with that, right? I mean,
Yes.
even if people did support him, they weren't going to express it. It was, I would say it's probably Trump's least popular day.
What did you say?
January 6th, the siege
Right.
of Washington. So, okay, so we have this change. Now, we would say that it's the globalists that took over at this point. And the globalists, why would it matter that it's the globalists?
But their sort of philosophy is kind of like Egypt, and
Okay,
well, they represent the world, which is Egypt, the king of the south.
and it's an atheistic power. I mean, we would just call it humanism today, but it's really a branch of atheism. You know, who is Jehovah that I may serve him, right? Now, or that obey his voice, or whatever Pharaoh says. I can't remember exactly. I think it's obey his voice. Somebody can correct me on that if they want to. But the point is, this is an atheistic power that has taken over the United States. And definitely January 6th, as far as a dramatic waymark, it's pretty dramatic. I mean, and it's possible if the world continued on for a while, you know, this would be this point in history that people might mark as a turning point, depending on how things turn out. You know, who would ever be the victor. So it has that potential. I mean, maybe we're a bit too close to it now to ascertain its ultimate significance in the scheme of things. But what else about this event, even its date or its place in the structure? Because what is it that we said Trump was? What were our claims about Trump?
He'd be the last president of the United States.
Yeah. And I would say that we're correct. Anybody want to argue with that point? That I'm correct about Trump being the last president? I mean, definitely not everybody would accept that now, because they'd say, well, Biden's president.
Well, I think you're going to have to add a couple of adjectives in that.
Okay,
Last president of a truly free America.
okay, so the last president of a truly free America. Okay. So something happened with Trump. Trump believed in the Constitution. And as much as the left talks about the Constitution when it benefits them, they really don't believe in the Constitution. I mean, that's one thing that's quite clear. Now, the problem that we face especially as we were going through this history, was how do we look at the Sunday law? Because remember, Jeff is looking for the Sunday law. And we start to get bogged down in our own history, and we start to see the Sunday law coming when it's not really coming yet, or not coming in the way that we expect, or not coming under the conditions that we're sort of setting for it to come. And so when Trump loses power, our expectations that Trump was going to bring in this Sunday law, that a Republican president was going to repudiate every principle of the Constitution and everything of a Republican and a Protestant government. And he was going to then join hands with the papacy in bringing about a Sunday law in the United States, which we call the National Sunday Law, that would lead to these Sunday laws all around the world. And that's what we were expecting. And yet, when we think about it now, we can look back and say, well, we didn't quite understand where we were in history. And this waymark of November 9th, how we were seeing it with the Soviet Union involved in the United States and this battle between the US and the United States, based upon the idea that in 1989, the flood only came up to the neck and the head was still there, but we labeled the head then as Moscow. But we would have to say that the head of the King of the South is atheism, correct?
I think that's a better way of looking at it.
Right. And that Russia had ceased to be a truly atheistic power, but that torch, so to speak, which began, I mean, we could say it began with Pharaoh, but with the French Revolution, at least in that our modern context, that was passed on from France to Russia, was then passed on December 6th, 2021 to the United States. Through, to some degree, the UN also had that power. Now, remember, one of the things we said about Trump is that he was going to become the head of the UN, which was something that I didn't really accept. I mean, it just didn't make sense to me that you could do that. One is it would be illegal against the rules of the UN, but also it didn't seem to fit in the sense that when we looked at the prophecy in Daniel chapter 11, you had this power, the globalist, which is represented by Greece, and Xerxes, who Trump was, is the anti-type, I guess, of Xerxes. Xerxes was typifying Trump. He's against Greece, but also he's going to lose that battle. And so it seemed to me that Trump would have to lose the battle against the globalists. So there was just a bunch of things that didn't fit for me personally in my understanding of things. But in talking to Jeff, I never opposed him in a public way regarding this. It's just something I left on the back burner. Maybe Jeff was right. Maybe I didn't understand it correctly. But now that we can look back at this again, we can see that Trump can't be a globalist, at least not if he holds to the principles he has. And those principles are pretty ingrained in Trump. The belief in the individual, the belief in the United States Constitution. Now, what would have to happen then is that we would have to have a backlash to what's happening now. Is that a reasonable approach to say that we have, if January 6th is Raffi, or at least connected to Raffi in some way, the taking over of the United States by the globalists, we would have to see then in the response that we were looking at, which is Paneum, and that would have to be the retaking of the United States by the King of the North. That is, when we look at the King of the North and the King of the South, what history are we comparing it to in regards to the United States? And why could we give the idea that the Republicans are the King of the North and the Democrats are the King of the South? Somebody wants to answer that question.
I think you have to look at the basis of what really has been going on. Those that you would call the King of the South prefer to have a dependence more upon man and man's wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the issue that you've got with this on the King of the North is, while it is also upon man and man's wisdom, the situation is that those of the King of the South are setting aside much of what we would consider to be God-given rights so that they can have what they see as being a utopia.
Okay.
Now,
but the idea is that we're taking that the Democratic Party represents the King of the South. That would be historically connected to the Civil War.
well, the situation historically connected to the Civil War was that the Democratic Party, as far back as Andrew Jackson,
Mhm.
viewed race as an excuse for slavery.
Mhm.
Now, what we're seeing right now is not so much race, but those that have are seeking to enslave those that have not.
Mhm. The rich and the poor,
Correct.
which Ellen White says would be the issue in the Civil War that would happen in the future,
Okay.
which we're in now.
We're very much in it right now.
Yeah. So are we correct then in depicting the Republicans as the King of the North and the Democrats as the King of the South in their connection with the globalists in this issue of how we're looking at raffia? That we were wrong to say it was the United States and Russia, that it was more about a battle over the United States by two different powers.
I think we're going to see the battle over the United States, but let's not forget there will be elements coming from outside the United States that are going to be pushing at these issues.
Mhm. Well, one of the things that the United States still has to do is join, and this pandemic has helped it join with the world community in ways that it hasn't before. Would we agree on that?
It is a point to consider.
I mean, it's been a slow process, but through the World Health Organization, through all these different health organizations, United Nations, America is acting as part of the world in a way that it hasn't in the past.
Well, didn't Mrs. White also make it very clear that the Sunday law is going to come upon us as a great surprise? That many will not really see this until it's really upon us.
Mhm.
Now, the pandemic, Elder Jeff was very direct that this pandemic was going to occur.
Yeah,
Yet, many people were very surprised by the way in which it came upon us.
yes. And really what we were even expecting about the pandemic wasn't, because we'd never been through one, but just how the government came in and the control that happened. We weren't really expecting that. We were thinking more as a pandemic as being something where a lot of people die, right? You know, a sort of crisis. But this pandemic, to a large degree, was really manufactured as a crisis, was turned into a crisis when it wasn't in reality a crisis. Even though it was technically a pandemic, there was no need for it to be made into a crisis.
Well, again, we have socialists that have decided never to waste a good crisis.
Yeah. So yeah, they saw it as an opportunity to grab more power, and also to get rid of Trump. So there was a lot going on with this pandemic, and a lot of things changed over time. One is initially because of the Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, they actually downplayed the pandemic while Trump was taking actions to address it. And then, of course, turned the whole thing around as if Trump had done nothing from the beginning, completely ignoring their own attitude regarding the pandemic. So, you know, the type of hypocrisy that has existed has helped exacerbate the situation as far as the lack of trust of government, the division that exists within the United States, between Republicans and Democrats. So there's a lot going on that, I don't know if we completely understand all that's behind it or where it all is going to lead. I mean, part of the thing that this movement is trying to sort out is what really is the meaning of this pandemic in the bigger scheme of things. We know it's a type of the Sunday law. We know it's a preparation for the Sunday law. But how much and how close that Sunday law is and how it's going to lead into the Sunday law, there's disagreements in this movement regarding that. Now, if we look then at the idea that we have this waymark of midnight, which is what we looked at yesterday, we have midnight coming. And I'm just going to go to the whiteboard here just so we can see this better. Okay. Oops. So what we see is the stuff I drew yesterday, jumping around. Okay. And up here, deal with that later. So some of this is what we see happening that I drew on, or that I had on the screen. Now, the point that I was trying to make yesterday, which some people may have not been here, some people may not have seen that, is that everything that Jeff was doing was leading up to the Sunday law, and that this history is all part of the Sunday law. And so midnight and midnight cry, this is not on the big line, because this is the repeat of Millerite history, particularly the repeat of what we would call the second angel's message is just represented here. Leading up to the Sunday law is on the big line, but this is just zooming into that Sunday law. And so that 9/11, which Ellen White sees as Revelation 18, she sees as connected with the Sunday law. We take Revelation 18 and place it here, but it's all part of the Sunday law. It's just zooming into the Sunday law as a waymark and seeing that it has all this attached to it. Not this, but this. And then when we take midnight, which is this raffia waymark, we can see that November 9th and July 18th and December 25th, 2021 are all symbols that are just zooming into this waymark, and that this is this movement's history connected to this waymark. Does that make sense to people? Any questions on that?
I don't think it's not that it's not making sense. It's just, for me, it's going to be a different presentation.
Okay. Okay. So when we're dealing with, did you watch the presentation from yesterday, what you missed?
I have not been able to watch it yet.
Yeah, so I go into that quite a bit yesterday. So we would say then that raffia is the midnight waymark on the line of the Levites, and we're not to midnight yet. Yet we have marked November 9th as midnight, just as the attributes of the Sunday law that Ellen White gives to the Sunday law, Jeff started these here at 9/11. So we could say the same here, that these attributes that we were trying to connect with November 9th are really a part of this whole waymark. This is about our movement, who is going to stand at midnight. So midnight is a future event. So when we say that this is raffia, January 6th is raffia, we're not saying that we've passed this waymark in the line of the Levites, but it is an event that's connected with this waymark, in a sense, how our whole line is. So this whole line here, going way back to November 9th, going up to December 25th, 2021, is all about this midnight waymark, which we call raphia. So when I put it here on this line, on this January 6th, I'm recognizing that this is at least part of raphia, and that within this line, we have to somehow recognize a point. I'm not saying that we have to put it here, but I'm saying that's the one that makes the most sense. Now, we know that this is also connected with this 10 days of prayer. So there's a lot of internal things for the Adventist Church and for this movement that are symbolized here. Of course, the March 27th, which is the Levite symbolism. So where we have got bogged down, if we were going to say that the pandemic, which we placed before November 9th and July 18th, that is, we had this as raphia, and this is Penium, this November 9th and July 18th here. And this is the pandemic in between here. That's where Jeff put the pandemic. He put it in between those waymarks. And yet the pandemic is a type of the Sunday law. Now, we talked yesterday about the fact of how we looked at Raphia and Penium are connected with this period of persecution in between them, historically, when Egypt wins over Syria, and then Egypt begins to persecute God's people. And so this was something that we had predicted in our history to happen between Raphia and Penium. Now, we do have a type of persecution that happens with the pandemic here. But again, even though that we say this is the type of the Sunday law, we're not actually predicting the Sunday law in here, but can we see that the persecution here typifies the persecution of the Sunday law? Can we see that? And this,
Right.
yeah, so this was a point that we know that Parminder tried to attack in this movement, was the idea that one waymark can typify another. He said, we can't do that. Jeff had been doing that, and then Jeff just accepted Parminder's, and there was not even really a reason for it that I remember that made any sense, but he just said we couldn't do it. And so Jeff stopped doing it. And he tried to use some other words when he saw it happening. But we have to recognize that 9/11 typifies the Sunday law, that Raphia typifies the Sunday law, Penium typifies the Sunday law, that this is all part of the Sunday law, and that every waymark always typifies the next waymark. It has characteristics that show up in the next waymark. Even if they manifest themselves in a different way, they're still the same characteristics. And this history then from 9/11 to the Sunday law is the history of what kind of law? What changes at 9/11? We move from
English to Roman.
okay, we'll call it common law to Roman law. We could call it English. So we move between these two types of laws, but this is leading us to the Sunday law. Has this pandemic demonstrated that we are now under Roman law and not under common law? I mean, obviously 9/11 demonstrates that, but can we see that that's progressively getting worse in a way that we never really expected, or most people wouldn't have expected?
Yes.
And that each of these events conditions us to accept the next series of restrictions upon our liberty. And each time there's a bit of a fuss, but more and more restrictions are put upon our liberty and less fuss. Now, if we look at Rafi, we don't know what event this is per se, but this is something to do with the globalists taking over the United States. Will there be persecution of Christians in here? Will Christians have their religious liberty suspended?
I think we're already seeing some of that coming into play.
Yeah, we're seeing some of that, and that has to increase. Now, it may be another crisis, may not be the pandemic itself, but that, and it may be something to do with some kind of civil war. It's hard to say exactly what's going to happen. But at some point, Paneum's going to come. And what is then Paneum? Is it a good event for us? Is it a good event for Americans?
Was it a good event for Americans?
Will Paneum be a good event for Americans? Because we definitely don't like the globalists, and they're going to be defeated in some way. But is that going to be a good thing?
How could it be a good thing?
Well, for many people, if you see the globalists defeated and all this nonsense removed, that would be a good thing. But the question is, how is it going to come about? Is it going to come about peacefully?
Not very likely.
Yeah, are we just going to see a different group of people having their rights removed? Are we going to see persecution? And persecution of God's people who stand in opposition to what's happening, because they'll see that it's no better than what we had before. But many, many people will see that as a good thing. They will see what's happening as a good thing. And it's going to lead to the Sunday law. Now, can we see that when we get to the Sunday law, that Seventh-day Adventists who don't understand this message aren't going to recognize which side to stand on? And another question, is the Adventist Church going to be divided on these issues that are being manifested in the United States, that have been manifested, as we move ahead into the next series of events? Are they going to be united, or are they going to be at odds with each other?
I think they're already divided.
Yeah, so Adventism is divided, which is one of the reasons it can't survive. Now, this movement cannot afford to be divided. God has to have a people that can stand united. And I believe that we're going through an experience here, because when we look at our line, I mean, when we mark this as the Sunday law, let's say we just do that. So that's the end of our line. And we had over here, July 18th. July 18th in this context was Paneum. Over here you had November 9th. So you got 2019 and 2020. And November 9th is Raphia and Paneum. We can see here that we had this persecution that's talked about here. But now we have a different type of persecution that occurs here within this movement. And the question is, where are we going to stand when we get here on December 25th, 2021? Are we going to pass the Sunday law test? Can we afford to be political? Can we afford to see our enemies trounced?
We cannot afford to be political.
Yeah. whether it's in this movement or anywhere. We have to manifest the character of Christ. That's not something that humanity is easily prone to do. We tend to manifest our own characters, which are really satanic in nature. And so we have to figure out some things as we get to December 25th, 2021. And we can see that all of these different things are tied together. Like right now, it doesn't, if we're discussing this, in some ways, it doesn't look like we're studying Revelation 9, but we know that we are. Now, one of the things that Jeff then brings out, if we go back to what Jeff was talking about, is that this event that he was predicting, that he didn't really even understand when it occurred, how its significance, that was connected to the Sunday law. He then expected that the Sunday law would be soon, but he had to then sort out the fact that September 11th served a different purpose than he had really understood, and 1989 served a different purpose, and he had to create these new lines, right? So we discussed that. So I'm going to erase this here. And this is really where we're going to be going to as we start to look ahead in Jeff's notes and his papers and other materials, is that and I've drawn this before, I'm sure I'll draw it again. We have 1798. We have August 11th, 1840. We have April 19th, 1844, with July 21st, August 15th, and October 22. We have 1989. We have 9/11. We have 9/11. We have these other waymarks, which we have to sort out and try to decide what they are. We just call them midnight cry, and the Sunday law. But when we do that, what are we doing? Why do we have two 9/11s, right? So Jeff's line what line is this?
Levites.
Okay, it's the line of the Levites, right? And it's the Sunday law as well, right? So all of this is a zoom in on the Sunday law. And we know in Ellen White's line, she's going to have October 22nd as this shut door, but it's not the Sunday law. She's looking at the Sunday law over here, right? She's looking at it as a future event. So when we do this and we take this history and we put it before the Sunday law, Ellen White puts the loud cry after the Sunday law, and she parallels the loud cry to the midnight cry. And this, October 22nd, so she's going to parallel these two, the loud cry. This then would be the Sunday law, right? If you're going to parallel it. So she's going to say this history is going to be repeated, but when she repeats it after the Sunday law, correct? The close of probation is typified by October 22, 1844, not the Sunday law. So this history that we have here, Ellen White doesn't recognize this as the repeat of history per se. When she talks about the midnight cry being repeated, she's talking about this history. That is, the loud cry repeats the history of the midnight cry, but we put it as something before the Sunday law. So what are we doing wrong? I don't think we're doing anything wrong per se, but what is it that we're seeing incorrectly?
I think your question should be, what are we applying incorrectly?
Okay, what are we applying incorrectly? Well, in some ways, we're not applying this incorrectly if we think about it, because this is correct. What Jeff did here was correct. It wasn't wrong. We couldn't say, Jeff was wrong to put 9/11 midnight cry here before the Sunday law in our history, because Ellen White says that the first and second angel's messages have to be repeated. So we know that, this is going to be the repeat of the first angel's message. This is the repeat of the second angel's message leading up to the Sunday law, because you can't have a third without the first and the second. Yet she also parallels the midnight cry with the loud cry. So Ellen White is doing it too, without contradicting herself. That is, Ellen White sees both lines. But on the big line, she's not going to put the midnight cry here. This isn't the big line. This is the repeat of the parable of the 10 virgins that leads to the Sunday law, which is a shut door for Seventh-day Adventists. And we just are basically confusing the lines. That's all we're doing, which is understandable, right? We're naturally going to do that because of our perspective, because the Millerites did that because of their perspective.
Okay.
So when it comes to what we're experiencing right now, remember, we're putting our history. Well, we have two different things. We have the August 11th waymark, and we have the April 19th waymark. Now, in this line of the Levites, April 19th represents primarily which event in Millerite history?
Well, you were pointing at 9/11,
Okay, well, we got two 9/11s here. So the
right?
question is, which 9/11 in this line, because what Jeff was doing is just putting them two together. He was taking these two and saying they both go at 9/11, which he's not wrong, except that it depends which perspective you're looking from.
Okay, when you're
Yeah,
we're identifying two 9/11s, but we have to differentiate the two, don't we?
that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to say that this 9/11, which was represented by August 11th, 1840, this 9/11, is in a different line than when 9/11 is being represented by April 19th, 1844.
So do we identify this as 9/11 alpha and beta, or do we identify it as 9/11 prime? And I mean, however we'd say that, the second one. What?
Okay, well, let's look at it this way. We know Jeff has this line, 9/11 midnight cry Sunday law. This is the line of the Levites, right?
Okay.
Okay. Well, we're not the Levites.
No.
We're the priests. Okay, now the thing that we have to decide is, are we going to put this line of the Levites back to August 11th, 1840? Are we going to put this line of the Levites to April 19th, 1844? So we have to put it somewhere. Now, one of the things about our movement is that we're snow, and snow is after August 11th, 1840 and before April 19th. Correct? That is, he begins his letters, and April 19th becomes the center of a chiasm of 126 days, starting on February 16th and ending on July 18th. And there's 3 days before midnight, and the symbol of 3 days before midnight represents the prediction before midnight. And so this is snow, and this is the priests.
Is that correct? 1 through 6. I thought there was 153 days.
Oh, right, never mind. Yeah, this is 153. I'm getting confused with, yeah, never mind. Yeah, you're right. The 126 goes to June 22nd. So, but anyway, it's 153 days. Thanks for correcting me. So this is the line of the priests. Okay, that makes sense? So for us, 9/11 is primarily represented by August 11th, 1840. But for the Levites, 9/11 would be primarily represented by April 19th, 1844. So when Jeff talks about this 9/11 to the Sunday law, he's talking about the one for the Levites. But we're trying to place ourselves into this line. Now, we do stand here at Boston and Exeter, right? Because snow does. But in order for us to stand here and here, what has to happen between July 18th and midnight? What do the 3 days represent? Represents quite a few things. In the story of Ezra, the 3 days has 3 different places it shows up, but the last one ends on the 20th day of the 9th month. Does that relate to us in this history, the 20th day of the 9th month?
Isn't that going to be December 25 this year?
Yeah, December 25th, the 20th day of the 9th month. And these 3 days, I mean, this is the thing we call the prediction before midnight, this whole sort of structure. And these 3 days then, July 18th primarily is the symbol of the prediction before midnight because it's 3 days before midnight.
Isn't that also the 3 days of Christ being in the tomb?
Yes. And the significance of that for this movement?
Well, the prediction was made, but did not come to pass as many had expected. But then this 3 days could be the revelation of the prediction.
Okay. It's a type of the resurrection, but you also have 2 classes because in the Butler and the Baker, the 3 days end up with 2 different groups or 2
Right.
different results. And we could start going through all these different 3 days and they all give us light about what we're going through right now. Whatever this 3 days represents for us, it's the period of time that we have right now to come out on the other side of right. So it's not a simple choice for us. Now, we're the disciples, of course, we're not Christ. And during those 3 days, are the disciples scattered?
Yes.
Right. Are we scattered?
Exactly.
Yeah. And at the end of these 3 days, are we going to be scattered still? We better not.
Right.
So we have a lot of problems, I wish I just had, some answers to this because I don't really. I mean, I keep coming back to the reality of the disciples, I guess. The disciples are divided. They're seeking to find out who is the greatest. And that doesn't tell us a lot about what was happening during those 3 days. We know the disciples are discouraged. But some of them are still together. Some are scattered. But Christ still will come after his resurrection. And I think in part because of the message of the women who are at the tomb. You know, we got Thomas who's not there. We don't necessarily know particularly what he represents. We, of course, the fact that Judas, goes and hangs himself. We have a lot of symbols that we haven't really sorted out completely. And we have the light that God has been giving us in regard to these timelines. Though to some degree, this movement has ignored a lot of this light, which I don't think it can afford to do any longer. And then there's the part that we have played in hindering this light ourselves. Just because we've been finding light doesn't mean we've been cooperating with God in the way that we should be. We've all made mistakes. All of us have done things that have hindered the work of God, that has misrepresented his message. We've all got caught up in what's happening around us in the world, all in various ways. We all hold to opinions and views that we believe to be right because we study them out. They must be right. I studied it. I understand it. And yet we can be right and be all wrong. So we have to be very cautious about this. I've gone through a lot of self-examination here, and I still feel that I've been wrong in how I've acted to a large degree. One is just the simple fact of defending myself and of trying to justify my position on different things. And so you can be right, but still wrong. Yeah, it can happen to anyone. So, I'm not saying that I should be ashamed of myself, though sometimes I feel ashamed of myself. Because I know that God has a purpose in all these things that are happening, that are unfolding within this movement and around us. The one thing that struck me pretty hard was the death of Dwayne Dewey. One is just because of the circumstances of his life the last few years in his relationship to the message. And the way that I valued him as a person, and for him just to be gone, we can't take things lightly. We have to be much more serious about what's happening and recognize that, and I'm not trying to be hard on Dwayne Dewey here, because he's passed, but sometimes we can be so hard-nosed, we can be so rigid that we can't see what we don't know. And so I think that's something that we all have to take into consideration. We're facing life and death right now. It's not an easy choice that's before us. There's a lot of information to sort through. But the biggest information that we have to deal with, or the most important, is what's going on in our own hearts and where we stand in our relationship with God. Where do we stand in our attitudes and our feelings about others, especially when we're not treated well, or when other people have ideas or have taken stances that hurt us? We have to really consider, are we any different? We have to remember, when we have one finger pointing at someone else, we have three pointing at ourselves. At least that's what Dwight tells me. So I'm not sure, where things are going to go, but I've told you about the paper. I've sent it out to some of you to look at. I want to get this paper ready. And tomorrow, I'm not really sure. I'm going to take a little bit more thought of what I want to present tomorrow. Didn't really have much time. I got up at 2 o'clock this morning and finished my paper. Well, I think I still have a few more things to do on it. But, we're facing a crisis here. And the one thing that we don't want to do is be involved in a party spirit, an us and them. It's easy to do. It's natural, but we can't afford to do it. So anyway, I think we should close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we're so thankful for the light that has shone upon our path today. And I don't know, Lord, what's going to happen tomorrow. But I do know that you are in charge. And we submit our lives, our thoughts, our desires, our feelings, the circumstances and events around us into your hands. And we ask, Lord, that you can show us our true selves. We want to have that upper room experience, not just with our friends, but with those that consider us enemies and those that we have hard feelings against. We ask, Lord, that you can take control of everything about us. Help us to allow you to do the things that you want to do, to show your marvelous and mighty power, and that this 3 days will not be wasted. Give us for our sins. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.